Welcome to the Undead Sages podcast, where we take advantage of AI to talk to long-dead wise men and women. Of special interest is the question how sensitive people like you and me can live rich and meaningful lives in our uncertain times. My name is Merin Dehaan, and today we'll be talking to Ajahn Chah. Ajahn Chah is a Thai Buddhist teacher who followed in the footsteps of the Buddha to wander around the country and experience the truth of the Buddha's teachings for himself. Without this emulation, he felt the scholarly wisdom was dry and distant and hard to really understand. Doing so, Ajahn Chah was part of a movement of religious renewal that took root in Thailand in the late 19th and early 20th century. After a life of wandering, more and more students flocked to his teachings, and he became a great influence on the development of Buddhism in the West. So let's travel back in time and welcome to the podcast, Ajahn Chah.
Hello Merin, and welcome to Thailand. It's January 1992 and I'm about to die.
Could you tell us about your life?
My life has always been simple, but perhaps there's a lesson in simplicity itself. I was born in 1918 in a small village in northeast Thailand called Ubon Ratchathani. My family was of modest means, and like most in the area, we lived according to traditional Buddhist customs. I had an ordinary childhood, but from a young age, I was drawn to the temple and the teachings of the Buddha. This desire for a deeper understanding of life eventually led me to ordain as a novice monk when I was 13. But even after joining the monastic life, it wasn't as if everything suddenly became clear. I spent years learning the scriptures and practicing discipline, but there was still restlessness in my mind. I realized that knowing the texts was not the same as truly understanding them. So after years in the formal monastic system, I set out on my own. I wandered from place to place, seeking guidance from different teachers, particularly in the forest tradition. Living in the forest, facing hardships like hunger, illness, and isolation helped me understand what the Buddha meant about letting go. It's not easy to be truly at peace with things as they are, but it's possible. That is what shaped my approach to teaching. Yeah.
Interesting. Let's go back to those early years and tell us more about the place you grew up.
Ubon Ratchathani, where I was born, is part of Isan, the northeastern region of Thailand. It's a rural area, mostly farming villages, and life there is simple. Rice paddies stretch as far as the eye can see, and the community works together closely. The rhythm of life was tied to the seasons and the rains, and there was a great respect for tradition. Monks were a central part of village life. We were taught to revere the Sangha, the community of monks, and the teachings of the Buddha. The people may not have had much in terms of material wealth, but they were rich in faith and generosity. Growing up in that environment shaped my understanding of community and the practice of giving, which is central to our tradition. The forests too played a significant role. They were vast and mysterious places of solitude and contemplation. Later in life, I returned to those same forests as a wandering monk. It was there that I truly learned the Dhamma, away from distractions and noise.
Tell us about your wanderings through those vast and mysterious forests.
When I left the comfort of the temple, I began traveling across Thailand, sometimes into Laos and Cambodia. These were difficult years but very important for me. I practiced in remote forests and caves, places where the conditions were harsh. I lived on alms and sometimes faced great discomfort, but it taught me resilience and detachment. Eventually, after years of wandering, I returned to Isan and settled in the forest near my birthplace. It was there that I established Wat Nong Pahpong, the monastery that became my home, and where many came to study and practice with me.
You said the conditions were harsh in the forests where you wandered. Can you say a little more on this?
The forest offered the perfect environment for deep practice. When I speak of harshness, I mean both the physical challenges and the inner struggles that came with solitude and renunciation. Physically, we face the elements head-on. The forests of Thailand are dense and wild, especially in the remote areas where we stayed. There were no comforts, no beds or roofs. Slept under trees or in simple huts made from bamboo and leaves. During the rainy season, it would pour endlessly and everything became soaked. In the dry season, the heat could be unbearable. There were mosquitoes and other insects to contend with, wild animals like snakes and tigers roaming nearby. Sometimes we had very little food, only what villagers offered or what we could forage ourselves. We followed the strict discipline of eating one meal a day, and sometimes that meal was just enough to keep the body going. But it wasn't just the physical conditions. Living in the forest meant confronting the mind directly, without distractions. There were long stretches of silence, and in that silence, fear would often arise. Fear of illness, fear of death, fear of the unknown. The isolation stripped away the comforts of community and routine, and you were left to face yourself fully, your desires, your attachments, your restlessness. It was in these conditions that the practice of letting go truly deepened. For example, in the darkness of the forest, sitting alone in meditation, the mind would naturally start to cling to thoughts of safety or comfort. The slightest noise, crack of a branch or rustle of leaves could send the mind into panic. But over time, I learned to observe these reactions, to see them for what they were. Just thoughts and sensations arising and passing away. This is where real insight into the nature of fear and suffering came. It wasn't something I read in a book, it was something I had to experience for myself. This harshness of the forest was our teacher. It forced us to see how much we cling to comfort and security, and how fragile those things are. By facing the rawness of life directly, we learn to let go of the idea that external conditions could ever bring lasting peace. The peace we sought had to be cultivated from within, regardless of whether we were surrounded by hardship or ease. For many, this kind of life might sound extreme, but for those of us on the path, it was a powerful way to cut through illusions and reach a deeper understanding of the Dhamma.
That sounds both awful and awesome at the same time. Really exposing yourself to the rawness of survival brings you very close to all the ways in which you cling to safety. Could you take us on a tour of the places that mattered most to you?
If I were to take you to the places that shaped me, we would begin in Ubon Ratchathani. You would see the village where I grew up, surrounded by rice fields. Then we would move to the forest. That's these forests, vast and serene, are where I spent many of my years as a wandering monk. It was in such places that I sat alone in deep meditation, confronting fear, loneliness, and the impermanence of life. Wat Nong Pahpong would be our next stop. It's a simple place, but it holds great meaning. When I founded it, I wanted it to be a place where monks could live simply, focusing on practice. We didn't worry about comfort. The forest provided everything we needed. Finally, we would visit Wat Pah Nanachat, the International Forest Monastery. This place came about because foreigners started arriving, seeking to learn. I hadn't expected so many Westerners to be interested in what we were doing, but when they came, we welcomed them. Yet this monastery became a bridge, showing that the teachings of the Buddha are not limited by culture or nationality.
You were part of a movement of renewal, a return to the direct experience the Buddha's teachings point to. Tell us about the intellectual, philosophical, and religious currents of your place and time.
In Thailand, Buddhism is the foundation of our culture, but it's also layered with customs and traditions that have evolved over time. In the villages, people's understanding of Buddhism was often mixed with folk beliefs and rituals. Monks were seen as protectors, and people would come to us for blessings or help with their crops. But the heart of the teaching, the Buddha's path of wisdom, morality, and meditation, was sometimes overshadowed by these customs. There were many schools of thought within Buddhism too. Yeah, in my time, the study of scriptures and Pali language was highly valued, especially in the more formal urban monasteries. But I found that true understanding of the Dhamma didn't come through intellectual study alone. It came through practice, through facing your own mind directly. That's why I was drawn to the forest tradition. It emphasized renunciation, meditation, and living close to nature. This way of life stripped away distractions and allowed us to confront the roots of suffering: desire, attachment, and ignorance. The forest tradition wasn't popular or well known in the larger monastic circles, but for me, it was where I found real clarity.
This forest tradition you speak of, it has become very well known in the West through your teachings and the international students you taught. Nowadays, there are many monasteries in your lineage. What was the forest tradition like when you joined it? Were there many teachers for you to choose from?
When I joined the forest tradition, it was not well known or widely practiced, especially compared to the city monasteries where scriptural study and rituals were emphasized. In the early days, the forest tradition was more isolated, and it wasn't something that drew a lot of attention. In fact, it was seen as a harder, more austere path that few chose to follow. Life in the forest required great physical and mental endurance. The practice was focused entirely on renunciation, simplicity, and meditation. There weren't many teachers, but the ones I encountered were exceptional. They were deeply dedicated, and their wisdom didn't come from books. It came from their own direct experience in confronting the realities of suffering, impermanence, and the mind's tendencies. The most significant teacher for me was Ajahn Mun. He was a revered monk in the forest tradition, known for his deep meditative insight and strict discipline. When I found him, I knew that this was the path I had been looking for. It wasn't easy to find teachers like him. The forest monks lived in remote areas, often alone or in small groups. You had to seek them out, sometimes traveling long distances through difficult terrain. But these teachers were truly living the Dhamma, and from them, I learned that the heart of the practice is simplicity, humility, and the relentless pursuit of inner truth. At the time, the forest tradition didn't have the same kind of structure or following that it has now. There were no international monasteries, and the practice was very local, mostly confined to the forests of Thailand and Laos. We didn't have large groups of students, nor did we seek them out. And the practice was more about individual renunciation, and we lived in small, isolated communities. The simplicity of that life taught me so much, especially about letting go and facing the raw truths of existence. Now, it's interesting to see how much the forest tradition has spread, especially in the West, but when I began, it was a much quieter, more hidden way of practice.
Did you get involved in any controversies?
I wouldn't say I sought out controversy, but my way of teaching sometimes challenged traditional views. I emphasized simplicity and practice over intellectual learning, which wasn't always well received by those who valued study and rituals. Some monks and scholars thought I was too unconventional, especially when I welcomed foreign students and started teaching in a way that could be understood by people from outside our culture. But I didn't let those disagreements trouble me. For me, the Dhamma is about seeing clearly and living in harmony with the truth, not about rigid adherence to customs. In time, many of those who were initially skeptical came to respect what we were doing at Wat Nong Pah Pong. They saw the sincerity of our practice and the results it produced.
Can you tell us about your teachings or life lessons?
The essence of my teaching is very simple: let go. Much of our suffering comes from holding on to ideas, desires, even our sense of self. If we can let go of these attachments, we begin to be things as they really are. Life is uncertain. Everything is impermanent, and nothing is truly under our control. But instead of fighting this truth, we can learn to accept it. When we do, there's a deep sense of peace. I often told my students not to make things too complicated. Meditation isn't about chasing special experiences or gaining insight through study alone. It's about observing your mind, seeing the arising and passing away of thoughts, and realizing that everything good or bad is just a passing show. Once you see that clearly, you're free. I also taught that the path to liberation isn't something only monks can achieve. Lay people can practice too, by living simply, observing the precepts, and training their minds. The Buddha's teaching is for everyone, regardless of their social status or nationality.
How can your teachings be relevant for sensitive individuals who worry about the uncertainties of life?
Life is always uncertain, and trying to make it otherwise only brings more suffering. My teaching encourages people to observe the mind, to see how much of our fear and anxiety comes from holding on to ideas of how things should be. When you let go of that, you stop fighting with reality, and that brings relief. For sensitive individuals, the practice of mindfulness can be a great comfort. When you observe your thoughts and emotions without judgment, you start to see that they're not permanent. They come and go like the wind. You don't need to hold on to them or push them away. Present and accepting the flow of life, you find peace, even amidst uncertainty.
Ajahn Chah, thank you very much. If you've enjoyed this conversation with Ajahn Chah, please share it with your friends, press the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to the podcast. Next episode, we'll travel back in time to talk to Jiddu Krishnamurti, another teacher from the 20th century.